Hey, y'all, and welcome to the bullpen. It's gonna be a little bit of a rough run. We're switching some things up, so no countdown, no intro music. You just have us here, ready to talk Texans. I even added, oh geez, am I using the right hand? Added a little Texans logo here, or a little bullpen logo, so that people know this is a podcast. So we're really cooking with gasoline right now. Um, Hi, welcome to the bullpen, Tom. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Astros are up 1-0 right now, looking to get 8 in a row. We are this close to more Texans football. I think a really good showing from the ones. So looking forward to that and just enjoying being a Houston sports fan.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Today in practice, particularly just seeing CJ Stroud really connect with Stephon Diggs, it's just given me a lot of hope for what's to come, which I already had a lot of. So, I mean, it's a good day to be a Texans fan. Let's just launch right into it and just talk about, I guess the topics that are on the menu for any Texans fan as the preseason progresses. I want to start with our favorite topic, which is the wide receiver room. I put out a poll recently on Twitter, and I asked of these three wide receivers, which one you think, if you had to pick one, has the best chance to make the roster. John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, and Ben Skoranek. We'll start with that. What is your answer and why?
I saw your poll. I answered the poll, and I picked Xavier Hutchinson, and it's solely because at this point in time, he's proven to be a wide receiver that can make plays in this offense, where the other two have had flashes, but I guess even John Mechie, I can't even say he's had flashes. Like that's the saddest. You're betting on potential with John Mechie, and then B, I really do feel like there is a niche that Xavier Hutchinson excels at that I think there's no one else doing what he's doing. This jet sweep, this wide receiver running back, kind of like hybrid role. It's his. It's only his, and I feel very confident that they're going to keep him around for no other reason than that.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think I've spoken to it earlier this week, and I agree that Xavier Hutchinson's kind of made himself feel more useful in more ways that are the ways you would see someone who's not a top 4 wide receiver on a roster be used. I thought that Ben Skoranek would do that, and maybe he is. There's that possibility that Ben Skoranek, in the eyes of the Texans, is a sure thing because of what he can provide outside of just being a wide receiver. But I think that, and the poll reflected it. I mean, Xavier Hutchinson was the clear answer in a lot of people's eyes. In terms of wide receivers that you think that I guess I think would be a lock that you don't, when we're looking, I guess the next best question to ask is, between Robert Woods and Noah Brown, which one do you think has the better chance of not making the Texans roster?
The better chance of not making the roster for me is Noah Brown. A, we have seen zero of him, and B, I just don't know what you want him to do that you can't get from somewhere else. Like, if it's a veteran presence, it's probably Robert Woods, and we've probably seen the chemistry more between him and CJ Stroud than I would say him and Noah Brown. If it's the ability to be a big-bodied guy, I think that's what Hutchinson brings. If it's the ability to, play on the outside, I think that's what Hutchinson brings. And I just don't know what Noah Brown does differently than anyone else that makes me go, okay, he stands out here. Even Ben Skoranek can play a little bit of what Noah Brown can play, in my opinion. And I really just feel like that's what makes it hard for me. I see him being a cut way sooner than anyone else on the roster from the wide receiver room.
Really? That's a bold statement. I mean, for me personally, I don't disagree with your logic, but I do think there's two schools of thought on it, which is that from what we've seen, we can believe that Robert Woods probably makes this roster. Like, a lot of what he's shown in preseason, even in this most recent game, leads me to believe the Texans like him as a player. And we haven't really seen anything from Noah Brown, mainly because he's been injured. But there's the thought process of, because you haven't seen it, it doesn't exist, or the thought process of, because he's not making any noise, he's just likely to make the roster because there's no issues with him. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I view Noah Brown as someone who's more likely than not going to be a Texan at the end of the day. I just don't think that they give him the contract they did, which, I mean, they very well could give him that contract in the offseason and then say, never mind. But I feel like they view him as a contributor moving forward. And I think a lot of the controversy inside of the Texans in terms of who to pick and who makes the roster centers around that wide receiver 6 position, and if they're going to carry a wide receiver 7. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Looking at other positions, running back, Joe Mixon returns to practice this week. How hype are you to see him take the field against the Giants this weekend?
For me, it all depends on the line that's in front of him. I want to see him in the worst possible way, but I want to see him behind the starting offensive line. I don't want to see him behind some combination of Blake Fisher and Pattinson and Scruggs and whoever else that is not Mason, Tunsil, Howard. I just want to see the starters together.
Okay. I'm pretty sure a lot of them return to practice this week. I'm pretty sure I saw Titus Howard return to practice this week. It's looking like we could see at least close to the starting combination of the offensive line. The only player I think we won't see, and it's partially because of like the surgery he had this offseason and partially because I don't think the Texans believe they need to see much more from him, is Laramie Tunsil. But Blake Fisher's been pretty solid in relief of him. And I think that the more I see Blake Fisher play, the more satisfied I am with that pick. Brief side note, totally not Texans related, but the Astros are playing right now. I need to go out and publicly say this. Like, I may have overreacted to this Kikuchi trade that was made. I was one of those guys really high on Loperfido, and I do think that losing Loperfido, based on what he was doing prior to that, definitely leaves a gaping hole for the Astros until Tucker returns. But obviously, Loperfido hasn't exactly shown out in his time in Toronto yet. So we'll see how there's more time to it, but I feel like it's definitely, there's been enough to say sorry to Dana Brown. So
absolutely not. Are you crazy?
What?
I was right there with you, and I'm still right there with you. And I will constantly be the bad guy in the room because you say Kikuchi is a rental. So you gave up on 3 young, very good, talented prospects for a rental. He's beat 3 very bad, or he's beat a team twice, a bad team twice, and he's beat another bad team. And that's great. I love that he came in and did what he was supposed to do. Fantastic. Love that. Kikuchi, great. I'm glad he likes being in Houston, all of that. But if you have not been paying attention to Will Wagner, who's been balling out of control, and I don't need Loperfido to light it up offensively year one. Bregman historically had one of the worst starts to a career that you could have. And I don't think anybody's questioning his ability to be a stud, potential Hall of Famer type guy. I'm not saying that's Loperfido, but I'm just saying it's way too early to just say, oh, well, Loperfido's a bust. And Will Wagner has been tearing it up. He was tearing it up in the minor leagues, tearing it up. And the pitcher that they traded was 23-year-old drafted 2 years ago in the 3rd round. So I think while this is great for win now, I'm not going to look at this trade and go, oh, well, Dana got it right.
I just think that I would apologize for overreacting. And I also think that what you lose in Will Wagner would hurt more if Bregman doesn't resign. I think that what you lose in Joey Loperfido would hurt more if they can't extend Kyle Tucker. There's a lot of moving pieces to it. And additionally, to speak to the rental piece, if Kikuchi doesn't resign, then yeah, I mean, or if the deal that he resigns is like excessive or hinders the Astros' ability to produce or to set up the team for success in the future, then yeah. But in terms of right now, I can apologize for the trade just because I know it's 2 bad teams, but good starting pitching play is something that the Astros have wasted a lot this season. And then it got to a point where they almost couldn't buy it, and now they've traded for it, and it is good starting pitching play, which is what they need. So I'm not too mad at all about that trade right now. there's definitely still room to revert back to, oh, I hate Dana Brown, and I can't believe that he would do that to me personally with what he has done. But yeah, I mean, I'm not like, I don't know, I'm not out on it. We got a question in the chat. Someone has asked us, and we've been asked this before. I'm wondering if your answer has changed at all. What do you think the Texans' record is going to be, just based off what we're halfway through the preseason? I think it's time to decide. Has it changed much? Are you still about in the same ship? What is your record prediction at this moment for the Texans?
I can't get past 11-6 as a ceiling. I can't get past 10-7 as a floor. I've been right there the whole time. And one time I'm asked it, I want to come off a game. One time I'm asked it, I want to add a game. I feel like this team's going to be very, very good. And I feel like it's almost a cop-out answer because I feel like that's a nice, safe spot. I've seen people say, oh, well, 12 and 5, or, I've seen people say 8 and 9. And it just, it's a weird, I feel like 10 wins the division, and they could get there and just really lose close games to really good talent because they're playing a first place schedule. And then I feel like they could just ball out, and I could be under because I just didn't have enough faith. I think 11 is my ceiling. I'm not going to get off of that. And that's just where I'm at. And it's not because I don't trust this team. It's not because I don't think they can't win every game. It's because there's other really good football teams that they got to play.
Yeah, the schedule is the biggest thing for me. As much faith as I have in the Texans and what they've done this season, that first place schedule makes me hesitant to be like so incredibly high on them. And I wish that I had a different answer than you, because that would make this discussion a lot more interesting. But like, you pretty much described where I've been most of the offseason. So I don't know. Like, that's pretty much where I'm at. I think it's sensible. I think that 11 wins would be really good for this team, even though it's only a 1-win improvement. And even getting the same record this year would still be an improvement for the team, just based off of how the schedule shifted, as far as we know. If you are a purveyor of strength of schedule as a statistic, then you'll probably, also agree with us there. Someone says, did the Cowboys fans say we would be 8 and 9 because that is a joke? I mean, I'd believe Cowboys fans don't think too highly of the Texans, just because they've got more important things to think about. Like, are we ever going to make the Super Bowl ever again? Will we ever have more playoff wins than the Texans in the time that they've been around? There's a lot of important questions about it now, but I mean, I guess if you wanted to talk to a historian, you go talk to a Cowboys fan about what the Texans are going to do, and maybe they'll talk to you about how the Cowboys have done in prior to the Texans' existence, when you had to buy your Super Bowl tape on VHS. But there's probably a few people in the chat that don't know what a VHS is. I don't know. I feel like I'm the youngest kind of person that might really know that. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, no, I couldn't really care any less than I do right now what Cowboys fans think of the Texans' record. Let's look at the defense. And what did you like from Petrie this past week? We'll start with Petrie because that's my favorite topic, as you know. What did you like from Petrie, and what do you want to see from him against the Giants particularly?
I don't know if you saw any of his post game or post practice comments. They mic'd him up a couple times, and I thought he was really open and really honest about, the guys around him really helping him be better. He's trying to get better too. I think he's not Damian Pierce-esque in the fact saying, hey, I'm not good enough to be this guy, but I'll get there. I think he is progressing, and he was really gracious of Kalen Bullock, saying he's helped me see some things in my game that I can get better. He's made me better. So I feel like just the fact that he's open and honest with where he's at as a player, and isn't, bullish or brash, or, just has that mentality, like, I'm the guy because I'm here. For me, that's huge. And as far as like what I want to see from him against the Giants, I know people aren't going to hear it, but I want to see him play. I want to see him play safety. I feel like we know what he can do in the box. I feel like what he can do with the line. He's very instinctive. While he may not be the best tackler, he's a willing tackler, willing to stick his nose in there where some people are not willing to get involved. So the fact that he's willing to do that, I don't have a problem with wherever he lines up in the nickel or that star that you call it. In the slot, I feel like he's really safe there too. If he's going to be better as a safety, I need him to play as a safety and be in that role. And we'll just have to see if he does.
I couldn't agree more. I think that you nailed it. My big thing is that the question becomes, right? So I agree with you that I'd like to see him play more safety just to see. Watching his post game, it seems like he's excited to be in the box. I think he knows that that's his strength. I think that he knows that that's what's going to get him paid at the NFL level is his skill in that. So making him do anything else only devalues contract negotiations later on, unless he picks it up, which we all believe he's capable of doing. I don't know anyone as a Texans fan, even myself, who doesn't believe that he can be good at playing safety and can pick it up. So with that being said, if the Texans were to Ryan Clark pivot and just send him into the box every play, he is not playing safety anymore. How does that affect the Texans roster construction at the nickel position? Do you think they maintain Desmond King? Do you think they maybe just stack up the depth of the outside corners and have some of those depth pieces, with a strength at nickel come in and play when he's not playing nickel? Or how do you view that going?
I'm more concerned at strong safety or free safety, whichever safety position they have him at. If he's in the box, then who is playing safety? And if your answer is Kalen Bullock, while that can be good eventually, I'm terrified early on because he's still a rookie. This is still something where you've seen him get beat. I feel like the same issues that you have with Jalen Petrie, you're going to have with Kalen Bullock. While he is a better defender in that aspect, do I think he's the answer? Do I think he was a first-round draft pick that they just got later on in the draft? No. So if that's the answer, then I hope they go out and they get another guy, a proven vet, somebody that. And no, I'm not talking about Murray or anyone else that they may have on the roster that doesn't sound like a starter to me.
It's like you're reading my mind because judging by how the Texans have run the ones without Petrie at safety, Eric Murray slots, not Kalen Bullock, Eric Murray would slot as a starting safety for the Texans. How would you feel about a Jimmy Ward, Eric Murray safety grouping?
How do you feel about it? Sounded like it was gross to say.
I had to work through the sentence one piece at a time. I felt a little better about it with a healthy Jimmy Ward, but I prefer, right? And that's why the whole discussion in the Texans fandom, when you bring up Justin Simmons, is like, we have so many other needs. What about depth at linebacker? All these other things. And I'm like, yeah, but like we're talking about a hole at starter if Petrie is deemed to be a player that doesn't start at safety and instead starts at nickel. If that's his usage and he is not a full-time starter at the safety position, you need to add a better name, a better player, an all-pro to be the starting guy. And I'll tell you, regardless of what you think about Jimmy Ward's health concerns, I've spoken to the fact that I believe that him being healthy and being on the field is going to be one of the most important things for this Texans defense. On top of that, pairing him with Justin Simmons, can you see that? Like, I mean, I think that if Lassiter is what we as Texans fans believe he can be, Derek Stingley is that guy. We already know that this is the year he proves it to the rest of the NFL. But if you're a Texans fan, you already know that Derek Stingley is that guy. And then you put a healthy Jimmy Ward up there with Justin Simmons. If the pass rush doesn't get there, I'm not sure the quarterback is going to find an open player on the field. And maybe if they're running a tight end in the linebacker area, they might slip someone by. But I don't know. That's how I feel about it. How do you feel about that?
Well, the one thing I don't understand, and maybe it's just because I'm not very, very well versed in what their play style is. You reference, okay, if Petrie's in the nickel, okay, well, if they're in the nickel, then they don't have two safeties. I imagine that guy slides down. So if they're in another formation, let's say, a dime or a 4-3 or something like that, where they feature two safeties, it's probably Jalen Petrie for me. And then obviously they rotate, guys in and out, whatever. But, the first down of the first season probably has Jalen Petrie at safety. And while that's not what anybody wants to hear because they're like a little leery of what he can do, I really feel like the reason they didn't go get Justin Simmons is because they're perfectly fine with him learning it on the fly and just, okay, if I need to go make a move at linebacker, I can. If I need to go make a move at offensive line or something, I can. If there's a guy that gets cut by a team where I got to take that salary, I can. And I think that's why that Justin Simmons isn't a Texan. There's been far too many people going, Justin Simmons, Justin Simmons, Justin Simmons. There's been far too many reporters asking the Texans about Justin Simmons for them to just act like they don't know he exists. I'm sure they're very aware that he's out there and could be had if the price is right. And they've just decided they're not going to pay that price.
I mean, I feel, and to speak to Jalen Petrie being starting safety, the Texans on first down trotting out a base 4-3 defense with with Jalen Petrie at starting safety is a lovely idea. It gives you the flexibility to bring him out down into the box. If it's a run play, you've got Jalen Petrie on the field, who, regardless of where you've played him, has been known to be able to sniff out the run. I love that. But when you move into a nickel package, you will have two safeties on the field and a nickel cornerback, and you drop a linebacker out. So, I mean, who's going to be the nickel? Is it going to be a case where when they run their nickel defense, Jalen Petrie is going to come in and play the nickel, even though we're calling it a star safety, we're saying he's just in the box, and then they're going to run Eric Murray out there next to Jimmy Ward? Like, what is the expected personnel grouping that's going to go out when it's not base defense, when it's not first down, and they're not trying to, line up and give a look to stop the run on the first play of the game? So that's my concern with it. And that's why I think it makes perfect sense to pursue some sort of safety if you don't believe that Eric Murray's the guy. If they're legitimately talking to the media the way that they have been, and they're saying, oh, we love the guys we have in our safety room, and we believe we're set, regardless of what we decided to do with Jalen Petrie, we are set at that position, then so be it. Go ahead and approach the season that way. But if they are not, then I sure do hope that whatever number they have on the table with Justin Simmons becomes good enough for him at the end of this preseason, because that, like we've talked about that, I believe that's the case, is that they've said, hey, before you go, he's visited with the Saints. I believe he visited, who did he visit with today? The Falcons.
The Falcons.
He's touring the NFC South right now. There was some sort of Broncos insider that believed he would sign with the AFC South before the end of last week. That didn't happen. So, I mean, if they're standing offers on the table, I believe that he's out there in Atlanta right now, and his agent's calling Caserio like, hey, they got $8 million on the table. It's like, okay, well, we'll beat that. Okay, cool. And they're moving on. They're like letting these teams put out offers and trying to see where the money is, and with the balance of, competitive edge and stuff like that. The Falcons are also interested in trading for Matthew Judon. If that's not the way that was being reported, was like it was in the works and not officially done. But
I read it that it was done. Pelissero and Schefter were like basically saying it's done.
They were working on a deal, and it's probably going to happen, is what I got out of the language. So I don't want to go out and say that it has happened if they back out.
I saw compensation. I saw a 3rd round pick.
Oh, so okay. I must have missed that. Maybe I'm a couple hours behind on my Twitter scrolling. So apologies for not knowing it.
I mean, that could still be worked on, but I saw compensation, and once I saw a 3rd round pick, I was like, well, that's a done deal.
That's a done deal. Yeah, you got to do it. I mean, and Judon's a guy I'm happy for him to get out of New England, but I don't know if the Falcons are that big of an upgrade. I mean, right now they are, but their quarterback prospects don't exactly scream contender for the long term. So we'll see how that goes.
I wonder if him getting acquired and them needing to pay him puts them out of a Justin Simmons type deal.
That could be it. And then it becomes a matter of, like, if you believe that Justin Simmons has said what he said or what has been reported, and that he wants to be on a contender, the only teams that have not signed a safety in the AFC South that have been connected to him, or, that are contenders, are the Texans and the Colts, right? Those are the teams. And Texans fans aren't going to like hearing me say that, but like the Colts legitimately, biggest question mark for me is Anthony Richardson. If he can assimilate and play in Shane Steichen's system, then like I'm sweating the first game of the season, and when the Colts come to Houston, like I'm not going to act like they're not a worthwhile opponent when they are, as much as I will bag on Anthony Richardson for his inability to stay on the field when he is. The 1.5 quarters that he played against the Texans last year, he put up 14 points. So I'm not shrugging that off. But I think that we're really going to find out, is Justin Simmons interested in being on a contender, or is he interested in money? Because if he's interested in being on a contender, the Saints are a team that no sane person who wants to be on a contender should even visit. Maybe he just wanted a free dinner from the organization and heard that they hand those out to people they want to sign and decided to take the tour.
Hold on. Who's winning that division? You say that like there's a clear-cut leader in the clubhouse in that division. That division is probably one of the worst in football.
Are we talking divisional contender, or are we talking Super Bowl contender? Because the Seahawks made the playoffs with a 7-9 record a while back, and they beat the Saints in that playoffs, but they were not a contender. They were just what was required to be sent to the playoffs because the division, the NFC West at the time, sucked. So with that in mind, the NFC South doesn't have a contender in it. Although I will say, if I'm choosing a team in that division to win it, I don't think the Saints are in my book of teams that would win that division. I'm between the Falcons and the Buccaneers in that division right now, depending on if Baker Mayfield can continue to play at the level he did last year, depending on if Kirk Cousins is the guy we know him to be. There's a lot of factors that affect that. But with that being said, Justin Simmons, if he wants to be on a contender, his only real options, per what's been reported, is to either sign with the Texans or the Colts. And so if he's just sitting on his hands until the end of the preseason, or he's decided he doesn't want to play for those teams, that's on him. But in my opinion, that is what it comes down to. So we can talk about the safety position all day, but talking about linebacker, that's a position we've talked about a lot. I want to know, I've overheard a discussion in person here where someone was talking about like which linebackers are going to be cut and who could potentially be signed by which team and all that jazz. Have you, since we last talked about this, thought of a linebacker that could be cut by his team that maybe the Texans would want to target, that could provide the depth the Texans are missing? Or are we still, is the solution still MIA?
I don't know. The TBD, is that a fair answer?
MIA is the missing in action.
I think they're waiting for one of these guys to step up and take the role. Some of the guys that D'Amico has been pretty, intimate with and coached up and that sort of thing. I don't see it yet, and that's probably the scariest position for me, more than safety, more than nickel corner or whatever. I am terrified of what the linebackers are going to look like right now. If anybody gets hurt, and this is assuming that Henry To'oTo'o is a starter. Like, if anybody gets hurt, the options behind those three guys is not good.
Well, and I've spoken to it. I think that maybe the Texans are just hopeful that a Neville Hewitt or Jake Hansen type can eventually step up and be a starter, and that helps them from a roster building perspective, because if your backup linebackers just so happen to also be special teamers, but can be expected to in the short term step up and play in relief at a level that's acceptable, then you've hit the jackpot. That those guys will only be special teamers for so long before someone decides that maybe they deserve a shot at something more than that. So I think that the position, I wouldn't be surprised if the Texans entered the season with the linebacker roster being comprised of linebackers that are currently on the team right now. I don't know if they feel the need to address that. It could be overconfidence in D'Amico's ability to produce linebackers like that, or maybe it's not overconfidence. It's just that D'Amico is that guy and suspects that during the season, when the time comes, those guys will be ready. Not sure what it is, but we do have a comment in the chat. Thoughts on Kenyon Green? You think he's a bust? ? Yeah, I'll let you take that one first, Tom. What are your thoughts so far on Kenyon Green this preseason? Do you think that he turns that narrative around that's been floating around him for the past couple seasons?
I don't think Kenyon Green's done anything to warrant any negative connotation. I think he's played. I think he's been serviceable. I think he's been pretty good. I think he's still incredibly young. I think that now with this from a spot where they needed him to be the guy to like now he's allowed to grow into that role. I love where Kenyon Green's at. Is he a first round draft pick talent yet? No. Can he get there? Absolutely. There was a couple plays in the Hall of Fame game where they were absolutely clearing some massive holes, and I get it. These were guys that they were going against that weren't good, but you were able to see him against lesser talent dominate, and I feel like that's the start to get him to where he needs to be. And I feel like he can definitely be a rotational piece right now that they can trust. They can have faith that he can go out there and not get CJ destroyed and be able to open up holes for Joe Mixon. So while Kenyon Green is not Kenyon Green is not lived up to his draft status yet, but I think he can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in that boat, and I agree with you. I mean, realistically, the only thing in terms of roster construction that's preventing Kenyon Green from starting, aside from the fact that Jared Patterson showed up in a big way on the O-line last year, is now depth. You've got Kendrick Green, who had like a really solid showing and then went down injured. So you ask yourself, you kind of present it like this: if it wasn't for Kendrick Green and Jared Patterson being there, I'm not sure we have this conversation about the questioning Kenyon Green's status, because it would take a true unknown player just coming out of nowhere to take a starting position. But now that those guys exist, I think there's this thought in the back of everyone's minds that maybe one of them could take the job, or maybe one of them could, be heavily rotated in and out with Kenyon Green. I think right now there's no reason to believe that Kenyon Green's not the starter. And I think that with our discussions throughout this entire offseason, him being the starter to start the season is a good sign. It's trending in the right direction, and it shows that, at least from the Texans' point of view, they believe that he has made the improvements and the strides that he needs to be serviceable for this Texans offensive line. And it removes a question mark, in my opinion. I mean, if we're looking at the Texans offensive line, I think that, Titus Howard, nationally, people don't know who he is, I guess, but he is the right tackle. Shaq Mason, one of the cornerstones of that Texans offensive line, excellent player. And then you look at Laramie Tunsil, left tackle, and then you look inside and you go, okay, who is it going to be? And I think the prevailing thought process is that Juice Scruggs will be center, because that's what the Texans drafted him in the second round to do. And then you go, who's left guard? Kenyon Green. Until someone else comes into the fold and outperforms them, those are the guys, whether we like it or not. But I think that this preseason has given us some warm and fuzzies. You pointed to the Hall of Fame game, and nothing but positive things came out of the Hall of Fame game about Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs, which, I mean, like you said, it's not the starters, and those are starting level players. So, I mean, the performance is taken with a grain of salt, but I think the Texans offensive line as a whole is in a good place. How do you feel about the O-line as a whole with what we've seen so far? I know we spoke to it a little bit with the Joe Mixon discussion earlier, but
I feel like this offensive line, this iteration of the offensive line, is probably the deepest that I can remember as a Texan fan. Like, normally you can't say, okay, I've got guys that can rotate all over and be good. I feel like we talked about Blake Fisher, right? So in a perfect world, you never see him, but could he play probably left or right tackle? I would think he could, and it wouldn't kill you. Juice Scruggs, rotation. Patterson. Yes, Patterson, Kendrick Green. All those guys can fill spots, and I feel like before it was like the starter, and oh boy, I don't know if that guy can be serviceable. Now I feel like any one of those guys could be serviceable if and when somebody gets nicked up, because in the season it's so hard to keep those guys upright for an entire season.
Yeah, and I mean the chat's got a good point. He agrees with you. Facts. Remember them days when we had 6th rounder Newton starting at tackle? We're way better now. Nick's got us. I agree with that. I think that 2023 confirmed that depth. If anything, I know a lot of the some of the pieces left, but a lot of the pieces that we're talking up as good depth for this Texans offensive line stepped up when injuries started hitting the offensive line, and are probably the reason why the Texans didn't miss the playoffs last year. But I mean, the versatility, it makes you think, did the Astros pick up these offensive linemen in the draft? Like, we're just looking for someone who can play anywhere, and we're going to play them anywhere, and eventually they will do everything. Not quite to that level. Speaking of the Astros, Yandy Diaz put up a fielder's choice RBI, so tied 1-1 in the 8th. Not a great look, but
yeah, there was a play at the plate. It was a weak ground ball in the infield. Tuve came home with it. Bang bang play. The guy Wallace is for Tampa. He just snuck his hand in there. Good play by the Stros. Unfortunate, but they still have time. It's looking like there's a review, I think, right now, whether or not this guy's thrown out, and we'll see if they can put up some runs.
We'll see. We got some talk in the chat, but yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about the Texans offensive line. And it's wild because it's going to be pretty much the same unit we expected to roll out at the start of last season, but I think they're more well-traveled, I guess is maybe the word. They've been through a little more, and I think that it feels different in a lot of ways, even though it's pretty much going to be the same. Mostly from the fact that Kenyon Green is not going to go out for the season right before the season starts. But Robert Woods out. We talked about Robert Woods earlier. I think both of us are on the same page that Robert Woods feels like he's going to be on the roster for the season. I would be shocked by that cut based off what I've seen so far, but who knows? I wouldn't rule it out, but I'm not like on that train right now. If John Mechie doesn't have a good preseason, I think we should trade him to the Panthers because of Bryce Young. Let's talk about John Mechie's trade value. I think we've covered that. If you listen to the podcast, we did our post-game recap and we talked about that, or maybe it's on the one we recorded for the end of the week. I don't remember. Those kind of merged into a blur for me. But John Mechie, I mean, what's there to say? Tom, I'll let you start off.
So I don't know if this goes into the thought process. You just want him off your roster. But for me, when I think about trades and how I evaluate what I think is, you always want to win a trade, right? You always want to get the better player. You always want to get the better value. You always want to do something to improve your team and not, just make a trade for the sake of making one. I thought that way with the Astros trade. I thought that was a trade for the sake of making a trade. With John Mechie was a second-round pick. If I told you, okay, they're out, they're going to trade him, what's the best you think they could possibly get? The best possible return? Maybe a fifth, I would think.
That's
based on what you've seen,
exaggerating it, but yeah.
There's nothing that says, okay, I can get more than that in my mind. And maybe I'm grading it too high, maybe I'm grading it too low. I just feel like he has zero value. So what purpose does it serve to trade him if you're not going to get value, if you're not going to get equal value or close to value on your return? I mean, obviously, if you run into a numbers crunch, so be it. But for me, I'd rather try to see that guy reach value or at least hold on to him until I can't anymore. Because if he goes and he balls out in Carolina because, okay, he just needed a couple weeks or whatever the case may be, you're going to feel dumb because you traded him for a 5th-round pick or 6th-round pick. And yes, you could keep Noah Brown on your team, or you could keep Ben Skoranek on your team, and that might be fine. But this guy, and I guess I'm always gonna lean on the college numbers because he just hasn't had a full NFL season to his name to be able to say, okay, I'm 100% healthy, no issues, no injuries, no cancer thing. This, I think, is that year. And this preseason kind of feels like a rookie season. You see him making some mistakes that you feel like a rookie would make. And I feel like when you go back before cancer, before the blow up of his knee, he was absolutely unguardable in Alabama. I'm going to be sick to my stomach if somebody gets that dude. If somebody gets the Alabama version of John Mechie and we let him go because we just ran out of faith, I'm going to be sick. And we don't have to do it.
I agree. I think there's a place for him. I think that we can make most everyone happy. Right? We talked about it at the beginning of the episode. Picking one between Skoranek, Hutchinson, and Mechie. If the Texans flex the roster right, let's assume 7 wide receivers. There's a place where 2 of those guys, at the very least, make the roster. And so, with that in mind, if you can do that, why would you not? Like, I think it's very important to keep high potential guys in the wings. We've spoken extensively to how Stephon Diggs' mentorship of John Mechie is very important and potentially primes him to be the relief of Diggs if Diggs decides to leave this offseason. So I just don't see the point in shaking up the wide receiver room in that way. And then we also talked about Noah Brown and Robert Woods. Like, why are we getting rid of young talent to keep guys that may be there another year or two, and don't have like the youthful high potential thing going for them? So, I mean, it's tough. And to speak to the chat, they said maybe a 6th. I think that honestly, at best, a 6th or 7th round pick is what you get for John Mechie. Do you think, based off what we've seen just in this draft alone, right? There's already one player that got sent to reserved injured list, and another within the 6th and 7th round, we have players that may or may not make the roster. Like, so are we really getting rid of John Mechie? I mean, obviously, if you were going to cut him anyways, you have to get what you can for him. But are we seriously just trading John Mechie for a 7th round pick for the sake of it? Are we going to get something in return legitimately for that? Not every team can draft a Tom Brady or a Brock Purdy with their 6th and 7th round picks. Like, it's tough to do. So on that note, let's see. We'll catch up with the chat. I want to see him shine on our team. I agree with you. I want to see John Mechie shine on our team. Hutchinson needs to stay. I think Tom and I are both on the same boat there. That makes sense to us. And I'd rather take the young guy than Woods. We have a vet in Diggs and Noah. Tom maybe thinks that Woods would be a better keep over Noah, or maybe is more likely. Would you like to elaborate on that?
I just read the tea leaves of all of it. Like, when you hear Miko talk about Robert Woods, when you hear Nick Caserio talk about Robert Woods, when you see them feature Robert Woods, they find him the football. It just feels like a guy that they're like, no, this is one of our guys. We're good. He's here. You know what I mean? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe at the end it'll be just business, and he was good for camp and he did his job, and now on to the next. But for me, I see him. I don't see Noah. And while Noah had a very, I would say, good first season with the Texans, I don't feel like there's an attachment to Noah like there is to Robert Woods. And maybe that's what I'm leaning into.
I feel you on that. And also, when we look at Noah Brown's production, while it is in fact there, it exists. It exists in very short spurt. Like, he had 2 200-yard receiving games back to back, and then most of his production outside of that was very spread out and very, I don't want to say unimpactful, but there was some plays here and there, like against the Bengals. He had that one play late in the game that set up the field goal that won it. Like, that was a really important play. But at the end of the day, I mean, I could see it just based off of how people talk about it. And we got a comment in the chat that says, even Aziz talks about Robert Woods, right? I think that at the end of the day, both of those players to me make sense to stay on the roster. I don't think it has to be Noah or Robert Woods, right? Like, to me, it can be both. So why not? That makes sense to me. Scrolling Twitter, saw a quote tweet from the Nick Schwager, Mr. Texans, across social media, that states, and it's a quote tweet of Jeremy Fowler. I'll read it to you out loud before we talk about it, because we were just talking about the Texans linebacker situation. It says, while the Bears were heavily involved in Matt Judon trade talks, the Texans also showed some interest. I'm told the Patriots had a healthy market for him, ultimately leading to the Falcons deal. Now, I don't know if you missed the most important part of that sentence, but it said the Texans also showed some interest. Do you think that that's an indicator of how the Texans view the linebacker room right now? Or do you think that Nick's just doing his due diligence with any talent that comes available that he can get his hands on?
I mean, obviously, there's the New England to New England relationship there. If there's a guy out there, they might have picked up the phone and said, "Hey, I'm about to put this guy on the market, and you're my first call." Moneyball stuff, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. I wonder though, can Judon play that kind of linebacker? I mean, would that be a fit philosophically? Is it, or like, are you saying basically just edge rusher, defensive lineman? Screw it, we'll do it. We don't care because I feel like they have a ton of edge rushers, and I don't know where Matt Judon would fit in there. But I don't know. I feel like they need guys that can play like coverage guys. I don't think they're going to have a problem getting to the quarterback.
No, yeah. So my understanding is that Matt Judon's a linebacker. That's what I come into this with. Like, does he play edge primarily? So it's mixed. I just opened Google and the first three results said linebacker, D end, linebacker, D end. It was like very mixed. So I would believe like if Nick was inquiring about it, I bet he views him as someone who could potentially fit the needs of the Texans, maybe a versatile player that could play both ways. Maybe just not like a middle linebacker. I don't know. But I mean, I'm interested to see like the linebacker aspect of that to me is what makes me think maybe the Texans think they have a need at the linebacker position that they're not showing to us except for through this one discussion. So let's see.
I can't believe with as much work as they've done to this roster to make it as good as they possibly can, that they can look at that linebacker core and not want to do something. Like,
yeah, it's tough to believe.
I genuinely feel like they see what we see and they're like, that's good, not great. And I don't want good. I want great.
Yeah. I mean, I can't argue with that. That's sound logic. We'll catch up on the chat briefly, and then we'll kind of bring this thing to a close. I feel like we've talked about what we need to talk about here today. We got right here. It says thoughts on Diggs. Been hearing he might be too old. I don't know if you've been hearing that. It doesn't really matter to us. He's on a 1-year deal, so he's old enough.
And you need to go look at the highlights today because today him and CJ lit it up.
100%. I 100%. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a fan buying into the hype, and maybe we'll end up like the Vikings and Bills fans in the past, disappointed. But I just have trouble based on all the circumstances surrounding Stephon Diggs and what could potentially be his time in Houston, based on the currently being a 1-year deal. It's hard to believe that the Texans suffer any of the ramifications of what Diggs has done to other teams in the past. So if he resigns, we'll start, monitoring that situation, just like we started the Watt Watch with Tom Chavarria. We got a couple of segments to show. Tom, do you have any updates on JJ Watt, what he's doing, where he's at?
He's in Wisconsin today, according to his Instagram. I believe he's probably catching up with family before he ramps up that off-season workout program. Obviously, I have nothing other than a post that he said that he was in Wisconsin. To the Diggs point, he got hit on a huge bomb today and a back shoulder throw that just makes you think that he's absolutely unguardable when those two link up. And I can't wait. There are people that are saying, I saw some Twitter chatter today that believe that Diggs will come back and it won't be about the money. It'll be about getting a ring. He's got plenty of money and he'll see how close this team is and want to play for a contender.
I think that if it comes to like, there's part of me that thinks that falling short in the AFC Championship would be like PTSD for Diggs to some extent. But it also makes me believe that if he sees that and he sees the potential this team has and he feels like they're a step away, he'll stay to see it through. Speaking of Diggs, I made a caption for my tweet today and I got some mixed feedback on it. I want to read it to you. I posted one of those clips, him making that, like, it was like a ball CJ put where no one else could get it, goal line type of play, really amazing. And I put CJ Stroud Diggsing for gold with this throw. And maybe I've just, descended into dad humor with, being a dad and everything. My second son is almost here. So maybe it's just really like the full moon for a werewolf. Like I'm just like hitting the dad jokes hard. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that caption? Too much? Too much? Was it a stretch?
So you know that thing they tell you, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, or just keep scrolling. I just did the keep scrolling thing. I was like,
You're
ugh.
like,
I'm here for a good dad joke. That just wasn't it. I was like, I never got that bad. I don't know.
it was a risk I was willing to take. If it's something you got to put out there and let people think what they will about it. And then let's see. I'm going to go back in the chat and find one more. Is Reddick a possibility? Now we have a chat that's from multiple streams, but I'll put this one up from YouTube. Hopefully we don't see Casirio pivot to Reddick like they did with Allen and Diggs. For those who don't know, Texans were in the running for Keenan Allen from the Chargers, went to the Bears, and then shortly thereafter we got the Diggs trade news. I don't think the Texans are in dire need at the position that Hassan Reddick plays. And if we're saying that's the same as Matt Judon, was it like that? To me, the way they label like linebacker versus edge sometimes can be a little bit confusing. But if we're considering them the same player, I don't think the Texans have a severe enough need to do that. Also, if we look at Hassan Reddick, I mean, as much as you want to say he's the same as Stephon Diggs because of the tumultuous tenure he's had, which has literally just been this offseason with the Jets, that's not the same. I think Hassan Reddick is just there's something to be said about his presence in the locker room and how it could adversely affect the culture that the Texans have built. So I'm not for it. Do you have anything to say on that one, Tom?
Well, what people need to realize is that Hassan Reddick got traded from the Eagles to the Jets because he wanted a new contract. And that was the only reason the Eagles cut him loose. Now the Jets are not wanting to give him said contract, so he requested a trade. So Jeez. For him to go to a second team in the same offseason, there's no way as a fan you want that unless you think, hey, this is a missing piece and we need to pay him and just let him go eat. But I don't know that there'll be a market. And then on top of that, I think it was the owner or the GM of the Jets said, nope, we will not trade him. He will be here. We will find him if we need to find him. But we went out, we gave up draft capital to get him, and he's going to be a member of the Jets. So I don't even think there's a possibility where that happens. I think it becomes an ugly, fight between the two of them, and he's just stuck because what team is going to want to get in the middle of that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that you have to view what his impact on the Texans culture could be. I mean, obviously, if they want to make that move, if the Jets are open to it, that would be a thing where I'd rather hear that the contract was ironed out before the move happened. Otherwise, it'd be pretty frustrating to see that play out again in Houston. And I think it's just too big of a risk with what the Texans have right now. I think there's other moves to be made after this season, but with where the Texans are at, the only two positions I could see them addressing before this season are safety and linebacker. Outside of that, I think we're not really likely to see any movement in terms of what the Texans are doing. But on that note, thanks for tuning in today. This has been the Bullpen, a Houston Texans podcast. I left it up in the corner here so that everyone would know that that's the case, because we've been asked before while doing this if we have a podcast. So we do. The Bullpen, part of the Fan-Sided Network. We're here. But yeah, if you want to find if you're watching this and you want to find it to listen to it, it's available the next day on Spotify and iTunes, or there I'm showing my age, Apple Podcasts. There we go. That's what they call that. If you're listening to it the next day and you wanted to see our beautiful faces while we talk football, it's YouTube is a good place to see it, or Twitter if you want to look that back up. Just search at James Roy NFL on YouTube or Twitter to find that. And then if you want to find me, I am at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at N1 Texans fan on Instagram. Tom is at TC Tom1 on Instagram and at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. So yeah, reach out and make sure you're keeping up, because those are probably the best avenues to figure out when we're going live, what's up with the show, what's going on. So keep in touch. as always, well, actually, before I really bring it to a close, if you're here, we currently have a preseason ticket giveaway going on my Instagram account. So if you want tickets to the Texans Giants matchup, do what that Instagram post says and then be ready. They're good seats. They are incredible seats. I promise you that. You'll be in the bullpen. You're listening to the bullpen, but you'll be in the bullpen, the best fan section in the entire stadium, if you win these seats. So make sure you get in on that. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans.